Hello friends, good afternoon. My name is Tanveer Ansi and we are here with another module, part 2 of what we discussed earlier, Indian modern art and the collectives, artist collectives that shaped up in early 1940s and afterwards. Today in this module we are going to discuss about a few groups and collectives. Those were formed essentially after 1940s and continued until 1960s onwards. The first on our list is the Calcutta Group. 2 years after the demise of the legendary artist Amrita Shergill in 1941, she died at the age of 28, a group of 8 artists in Calcutta, thinking in the similar lines, formed a group in 1943. In their manifesto, they summarized their views as, and I quote, "The guiding motto of our group is best expressed in the slogan, art should aim to be international and interdependent." In other words, our art cannot progress or develop if we always look back on our past glories and cling to our traditions at all costs. The vast new world of art, rich and infinitely varied, created by masters of the world over, beckons us. We take from them all that we could profitably synthesize with our own requirements and tradition. This is all the more necessary because our art has stood still since the 18th century. So when they're talking about 18th century, they're essentially talking about the discontinuation of the tradition, the lack of patronage, and how with the demise of Mughal kingdom and the rise of English class and the English empire in India, how the Indian cultural scene received a major setback because English found no interest in Indian art. During the past 200 years, the world outside of India has made vast strides in art, has evolved epoch-making discoveries in forms and techniques. It's therefore absolutely necessary for us to close this hiatus by taking advantage of these developments in the Western world. Unquote. The founding members of Calcutta Group included Nirod Majumdar, Shubho Tagore, Gopal Ghosh, Paritosh Sen, Ratin Maitra, Pran Kishan, Pradosh Das Gupta, and Kamla Das Gupta. Later on, artists like Ram Tinker Baj, Govardhan Ash, Ambani Sam, Sunil Madhav Sen, and Hemanta Mishra also joined the group. The formation of this group, and we have already studied a little bit about this, historically can be situated amidst of the chaos and looming threat of World War II and the British engineered Bengal famine. Those were the crucial times. In a later published booklet by the group, the impetus behind the group is written as, "Man is supreme. There is none above me." This was the guiding slogan when the Calcutta Group was formed in 1943. Those were the dark days for Bengal. Famine and pestilence were then stalking the land. The barbarity and heartlessness moved us, a few young artists, deeply. We began to think, to search our hearts and ask ourselves which way. The Calcutta Group attempted to dispense with the nostalgia of Bengal school and its obsession with the past. They aimed to formulate a new ideology, creating a new blend of East and the West. The group was instrumental in augmenting a new movement. For Pradosh Das Gupta, the time to preoccupy with gods and goddesses was over. The artist could no longer be blind to his age and surroundings, his people and society. It's noteworthy the group never attempted to create a propaganda through their art. In Gupta's own words, we never took a pledge to allow the path of social realism. All we want is to understand life and interpret it in terms of creative art. Indeed, we believe in humanism without any political binding or direction. The group held its first exhibition in 1945. 8 artists participated in it. They were Pradosh Das Gupta, Kamla Das Gupta, Pratin Maitra, Nirod Majumdar, Paritosh Sen, Pran Krishna Paul, Gopal Ghosh, and Shubho Dego. Although their individual stylistic approaches were different, the thread that bound them together was the shared and innovative outlook, an urge to shake off the traditional beliefs and enter the mainstream world of art. After 1953, most of the members associated with the group evolved their own individual styles, which became their hallmarks later on. But unfortunately, not much is known about their work. They produced as members of the group with a collective model. Historians and critics have not found enough documented material on the basis of which we could form an idea of the works created during the decade this group was active in Kolkata. Whatever has been said about their aims and objectives is based on very little remains of a few illustrations in articles or reviews in newspapers and journals of time. Mulkraj Anand, who saw the first exhibition of the group, wrote, reacting to their exhibition held in Bombay between 1944 and 1945, the art critic of the Times of India wrote, and I quote, Bengal has exercised a very strong influence on modern Indian art ever since Rabindranath Tagore and his followers inspired the Indian Renaissance movement some 40 years ago. We welcome this exhibition of the Calcutta Group, which brings to Bombay the first specimen of modern Bengal art since Jamini Royal exhibition 3 years ago. The Calcutta Group lasted for nearly a decade. In 1953, the group had its last show in Delhi. From a very few examples that are available to us, both in the form of archival material and the works of the artists of the group from the time when they worked as collective, it is evident that the Kolkata Group genuinely set to break new conceptual ground and arrive at a different understanding of art. Our next group is the Progressive Artist Group of Bombay. We'll discuss Progressive Artist Group at length in the coming module, but right now we are going to briefly talk about the Progressive Group in general. We'll leave the individual artists and the members who were associated with this group for the next module, in which we'll talk, as I said, in detail about their individual lives and struggles as artists. The Progressive Artist Group PAG was formed in Bombay in 1947, the same year that India got independence from nearly 100 years of British rule on August 15, 1947. The formation of this group is seen as a conscious artistic departure from the alien British academic style of painting, which they had not learned themselves, but at the same time, they were vehemently against the idea of homogeneous and spiritless nationalistic attempts at Indianness and Indianization of the Indian art, which was propagated by Bengal school in the form of call for a revival movement. It was a stand against the then prevalent naturalistic art practice that was being taught at the art schools established by British in India. The artists of the Progressive Group rejected the British academic style of painting and chose to work themselves in modern European style of painting. Bombay, as we discussed previously, was an important art centre during the British rule. It had changed significantly after the independence. An exhibition held by Calcutta Group in Bombay in 1944, 3 years before the formation of PAG, left a considerable impact on 6 young artists of the city who were thinking afresh about the fate and current Indian visual art. They comprised Francis Newton Souza, Krishnaji Haulaji Ara, Sayyid Haider Raza, Makbul Fida Hussain, Hariyamba Das Gade, and Sadam Bakr. Taking inspiration from the movements that preceded them, a group of young men from Bombay, brimming with new ideas, formed the Progressive Artists Group in 1947. Its first exhibition was held in July 1948 in Bombay. Francis Newton Sura wrote the manifesto stating the ideology of the group. He wrote, "I don't quite understand now why we still call our group as progressive. Not that the most retrogressive institutions call themselves so, but we have changed all the chauvinist ideas and the leftist fanaticism which we had incorporated in our manifesto at the inception of this group. To bring about closer understanding and contact between different sections of artists, communities, and the people, we found this in the course of working an impossibility because there is not only a permanent rift between sections of artists, between Whistler, Munich, and Picasso, Archeraker, and Jamini Roy, but the gulf between the so-called people and the artists cannot be bridged." He further stated, "Art will, as long as it remains, be esoteric. It cannot be utilitarian. Functional manufacturers of household commodities, didactic, illustrational, for schools, books, or party journals, socialist, putative art of the Soviet Union, and religious, of the sort we see today, painted clay Ganapatis and blonde operatic Christs. It is mercenary, pedagogic, political, and devotional bug, never pure, intrinsic art. Today we paint with absolute freedom. Today we paint with absolute freedom for contents and techniques almost anarchic, save that we are governed by one or two sound, elemental, and eternal ways of aesthetic, order, plastic coordination, and color composition. We have no pretensions of making vapid revivals of any school of movement in art. We have studied the various schools of painting and sculpture to arrive at a rigorous synthesis." The next group in line is Bombay Art Group or Bombay Group. When the Progressive Artists Group disintegrated in 1953, a new group by the name of Bombay Group emerged in Bombay. The founding members of the group were also previously part of the Progressive Artists Group. They included K.K. Heber, K.H. Ara, Ajay Gade, S.G. Chawda, D.H. Kulkarni, B.S. Gaitonde, Mohan Samant, S.B. Palsikar, Baburao Sadvelkar, and Hari Krishna Rao. The group remained active from 1957 to 1962 and held 6 exhibitions. They sought inspiration from Ajanta and Indian miniature paintings and tried to blend the elements of Western and contemporary Indian art as well as the traditional Indian art from a contemporary perspective. However, they gradually moved towards abstraction and simplification of form. All of them were exceptionally talented in drawing and painting. They tried to emphasize abstract expressionism and other modern European mediums. Other artists who participated in their exhibitions included Akbar Padamsi, G.M. Sul, Jahangir Sabawala, Tayyab Mehta, Badri Narayan, Homi Patel, and Amba Das. The next group in line is Delhi's Shilpi Chakra. In the wake of partition of the country in 1947, many artists moved from Lahore to Delhi. Delhi of that time housed the Sharda Ukil School of Art and All India Fine Arts and Crafts Society, also known as IFEX, the only 2 organizations for the artists in the city. Artists became associated with the All India Fine Arts and Crafts Society. However, this association did not last long because the organization was governed by non-artists and artists associated with it had no or less say in its matters. This offended a section of artists who then decided to quit. The dissenting group that included V.C. Sanyal, Kamal Krishan, K.S. Kulkarni, Dhanraj Bhagat, Prannath Maggu, Hari Krishna Lal, K.C. Aryan, Damayanti Chawla, Dinkar Kaushik, Jaya Appasamy, Srinivas Pandit, and Brij Mohan Manod organized themselves into Delhi Shilpi Chakra. Later on, many other artists and art students joined the group. They included Rajesh Mehta, Rameshwar Bhutta, Jagmohan Chopra, Paramjeet Singh, Anupam Sood, Satish Gujarat, Ram Kumar, Avinash Chandra, Keval Soni, Vishambar Khanna and Devyani Krishna. Prannath Maggu, while giving a brief historical account of the group, remarks, "It was clear that unless artists came together on the basis of their professional interests and needs, free of benevolently patronizing control of non-professionals, however well-intentioned, no organization could really become meaningful. Self-reliance and self-respect are synonyms for the artist. Other reasons apart, the emergence of Shilpi Chakra also symbolized the aspiration of young progressive artists in seeking something different from what had been popular trend in the works of painters of Bengal school." The manifesto of the Chakra declared, "The group recognizes art as an activity must not be divorced from life. That the art of a nation must express the soul of its people and ally with the process of progress. The group recognizes that the artists have to come together to work hard towards the progress of art and through art help building up a virile national culture and brighter life in the country. Searching for the alternative space other than those with official sanctions, the Chakra organized exhibitions in the mohallas of Chandni Chowk and Karol Bagh as well as the university campus. This was one of the things that the Chakra took a little ahead because they believed in the philosophy of making art available to the common people. Therefore, some of the times they exhibited in the most unconventional of the spaces which one couldn't have thought of becoming art galleries, or one couldn't have thought of watching an art exhibition or visiting an art exhibition in those spaces. Chakra actually took the artists to work in unconventional and display in unconventional spaces with a spirit of demonstrations that they held and carried out in the lawns of Connaught Place, and weekly art criticism meetings were held in the same premises in order to build a space for the dialogue between the practice and theory. Since it didn't have any particular ideological base, it invited eminent artists like Selos Mukherjee and K.G. Subramaniam to participate in its annual exhibition. The initiatives of Chakra continued well until mid-60s, perhaps one of the longest lived group. But at the same time, it was not a concerted or an organized group because it was open to all artists, and whosoever came, whosoever wanted to get associated with the group, they were all welcome. That's why we see a plethora of artists who joined the group. There were student members also, there were artists who came from outside of the Delhi. Essentially, it was not a group of the Delhites only, but people from Baroda, people from Shantiniketan, artists from other parts of the country were invited to discuss, and some of them spent time with the artists, local artists of Delhi, and those were the artists who came, they were artists in residence. They worked and they exhibited with the group as well. Group 1819 was the brainchild of Jagdish Swaminathan. We have learned a little bit about Jagdish Swaminathan in the previous module on art patronage, that how he believed in a contemporary art where he thought that the folk and the tribal art of this country should be treated equally with that of the contemporary art, because these art forms are also taking place in the same time zone that other art forms are. Doesn't matter if they are not taking place in the same contact zones, but they share a lot because they belong to this age and time. The idea grew out of a meeting of artists at Bhavnagar on 25th and 26th August 1962. The name 1890 was derived from the number of the house of J. Pandya where the artists met. The manifesto of the group was formed at Bhavnagar and adopted in Delhi. The members included Jairam Patel, Jagdish Swaminathan, Amba Das, Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, Himmat Shah, Eric Bowen, Jyoti Bhatt, Rajesh Mehra, M. Redappa Naidu, Raghav Kaneria, Balkrishna Patel, and S.G. Nigam. The first exhibition of the group was held in 1963, and it proved to be the last exhibition of the group as the group disintegrated. Writers and intellectuals in Kashmir, like any other city in India, were also concerned about the representation of cultural scene of Kashmir, the representation of artistic scene of Kashmir on the national front. This led to the crucial formation of National Cultural Front in 1947, which was founded by the then aspirant artist P.N. Kachru. Kachru soon came in contact with two other like-minded artists, Trilok Khol and S.N. Bhatt. This idea was further spruced up by the intervention of S.H. Raza, the member of the Progressive Group Bombay, and the then College of Art principal at Kolkata, Percy Brown. These two members played a crucial role in giving a proper guideline to the thinking of these three artists who formed this collective, which was famously known as the Trio. Now, as there was the paucity of cultural space in Kashmir, it's quite similar to Delhi, when the Shilpi Chakra, which we talked about previously, it was established in Delhi. These artists had no formal space to meet, had no formal space to go in and discuss their ideas, had no formal space to talk about what they actually wanted to do with the formation of a collective. But at the same time, they would meet and walk alongside the river Bund of Jhelum, discuss the ideas. Their regular meetings, they regularly meet alongside the river Bund of Jhelum to discuss the ideas about art, to discuss the ideas of representation, to discuss the ideas of modernity, to discuss the ideas of progressiveness. Now, what these engagements culminated into was something very serious, something that had never happened before. They showed a serious concern about the stagnation and the limitation and the dry cultural scene that was prevalent in Valley for over 100 years. Now, what they aimed to do was to revitalize, to regenerate the artistic landscape of Kashmir. Now, going back a little bit to the aesthetic discourse, and as we all know, philosophers like Abhinav Gupta, Mahima Bhatt, Bhatta Lolat, Anand Vardhane, Shaimendra, and so on and so forth, had left us with a rich lineage of literature, of aesthetic theories, of theories on art, of ideas. But there was a certain cultural hiatus which was felt at the time of the beginning of the modernism in 20th century in India, when India was trying to look back on the Indian artists and the cultural intellectuals were trying to look back at the past of India, trying to look back at the cultural heritage, trying to look back at the artistic heritage. Remember when Nandlal Bose was visiting Ajanta times and again to copy the murals, to copy the techniques. When Abhinendranath was taking the references from the Mughal miniatures. When people in Shantiniketan, people in Calcutta were thinking about the idea for revivalism. In Kashmir also, they were looking back at the tradition, looking back at the rich past, looking back at what has happened in the history, in order to make some connections of the present with the past, so that come to terms, to come to consensus with an idea that could actually help in revising the so-called artistic scene of Kashmir. The group had its exhibition in Srinagar. It was visited by a vast majority of the people across all walks of life. It was open to everybody. They held an exhibition in 1949 in Delhi, which was inaugurated by Professor Humayun Kabir. The Kashmir
found its first representation on the national artistic scene of India. But what transpired during these years was important, that it was not only about limiting oneself to creating a vocabulary of art, but at the same time it was about remaining open to the ideas, remaining open to the dialogue with the people who were already engaged with creating a modern art of India, with defining the cultural sphere of India on the world cultural map. Interestingly, Trilok Kaul and Bhatt, and later on G.R. Santosh, they made it to Baroda to study in the famous MS University under the tutelage of N.S. Bendre. Santosh became an important member of the Progressive Artists Association in Kashmir, but soon he left for Delhi. This association, however, it was short-lived, but one has to think about the foundation that it laid, the concerns that it addressed, and something that it opened up for the art scene of Kashmir, for the people of Kashmir, for the intellectuals of Kashmir, for the dialogic ability of the people of Kashmir, was unparalleled. What we learned about these groups is very crucial, and I will sum it up for you in few words. When we talk about the groups and collectives in India, when we look at the histories, the concerns, the ideations, the concepts the members of the group or the collectives came together with, they were essentially the concerns that were not devoid of thinking about the contemporary and the modern, the now and here. So what these groups helped in organizing, what these groups were instrumental in establishing, was a precedent, was something that had never happened before, as I said before, something that gave rise to the Indian art history, that also paved way for new thinking. Often these groups, as we saw, challenged the established norms. As we saw with the Calcutta group, it was about not to hark back on the idea of revivalism, but create an idiom, create a language of art that suits equally to the viewer who watches it or who sees it from a regional context, but at the same time, when it is represented on an international platform, it also, the viewer there, finds a connection with it. All in Kolkata, that time Calcutta, in Bombay, in Madras, in Kashmir, in Gujarat, all these groups had something in common. And that commonality was the commonality of thinking. But that commonality was not homogeneous, to say. It was diverse. It represented the concerns of the region, at the same time concerns of the nation, the concerns of the national art, the concerns of the tradition. It also reflected back on the past, but did not bring back the past as Kolkata, as the artists like Abhindranath had sought to. They tried to create something new out of the past and present, which ultimately paved way for the ideas that we inherited from them. Thank you.